Good Sunday afternoon, everyone. It is Sunday, May the 10th, 2020. It is 4:24 p.m. Central Time. I'm here at Victory Baptist Church. I'm kind of here for, I guess you could say I'm here for the evening service, but I'm on the air now, so this may turn out kind of being the evening service. Let me look at something really quick. I just went live. I don't know where I went live under. Make sure. Okay, yes, I am live under the Theology Central podcast. Yes. So welcome everyone to the Theology Central podcast. I didn't know which podcast to say welcome to, right? So we have too many podcasts, and sometimes when I go live, there's a little button that I have to choose which podcast I'm going live under, and sometimes I forget to change it. So welcome. If you're listening to us on Spreaker, you get to hear our professional intro, so you know which podcast. All the rest of you, sorry, you don't get to hear the professional intro. So welcome to the Theology Central podcast on a Sunday afternoon, which may actually turn out to be the Sunday evening service. Okay. So yes, this is I got here hours early, and I'm just going live until I feel like that I'll put it this way. I'm giving people plenty of things to listen to, even if they need to go back at 6 o'clock, and they can either at 6 o'clock, they can listen to what I did this morning on the VBC Bible Institute. They could listen to what I just did a little while ago, continuing our series on the 21 paradoxes, or they could listen to this, which will turn out to be a discussion about the book of Revelation and hermeneutics. All right. We're going to throw in a lot of that together. So we have a lot to do. So we're going to have to jump right in. A little while ago, I got a notification. Well, not a little while ago. I saw it again, but I don't know when I got the initial notification. The initial notification came in at some point about the Credo podcast doing an episode on the book of Revelation. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So a little while ago, I saw the notification. Either I hadn't deleted it. I don't know how I ended up seeing it again, but I saw it again, and I'm like, you know what? That's got to be interesting to listen to. So I know what I'll do. I'll grab that episode and we'll listen to it together, and I'll throw in my thoughts, and we'll see where it goes. Now, let's try to set this up. All right. The book of Revelation, we all know. I mean, anyone who's been a Christian for any length of time, there are so many interpretations to the book of Revelation that it's staggering to the mind that millions of Christians can pick up the exact same book, right? Pick up the exact same Bible, open to the book of Revelation, and then before it's over, you can end up being an amillennialist, a premillennialist. You can be pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. You can be, so many different variations and so many different interpretations, and so completely, entire systems of eschatology, entire systems about the end times, and a lot of it derived from the book of Revelation. And everyone believes that their system of eschatology, whether you're an amillennialist, premillennialist, whatever millennialist you are, no matter what you believe about, the tribulation, mid, post, all the different, pre, no matter what you believe about a rapture, no rapture, whatever you believe, everyone believes that their system is not only articulated in the book of Revelation, but they believe the book of Revelation supports and proves their system of eschatology. And it's crazy. And what's interesting about this is on the way home from church this afternoon, when I left church after 12, I was listening to American Family Radio, 91.3 FM here in the Abilene, Texas area. And they were playing a message from a conference, and it was all about, guess what? The rapture. And the person was just downright saying, look, the Bible teaches the rapture. If you don't believe in the rapture, basically you're a heretic. He was like, it's emphatic. It's clear. The scriptures are clear about this. There's no way to get around it. If you don't see that, you're misreading the Bible. And then when I pulled up the audio for this program and started listening for a few minutes, saying if it's something I wanted to cover, I'm like, oh, he talks about misreading the book of Revelation. And I guarantee you his system and his viewpoint on the book of Revelation is drastically different than the viewpoint that I heard this morning. Two individuals, both teach the Bible, both, preach about the Bible. One writes commentaries about the Bible. They're all teachers of the Bible in some capacity. And guess what? Radically different approaches to the text. Now, if that doesn't frustrate some Christians, I don't understand why it doesn't frustrate some Christians. Some Christians are like, I guess everyone just has a different opinion. It bothers me to no end because, again, what is supposed to be our final authority? The Bible. It shouldn't be us. But if everyone has a different interpretation, you have to ask yourself, how much is the Bible the authority and how much of it are we the authority? It drives me crazy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to just hit play on this episode of the Credo podcast. Again, Credo podcast. You should subscribe to it. Anytime I play a podcast, I say the same thing. Subscribe to these podcasts. Even when I disagree, I listen to things I disagree with because they challenge me. But when it comes to the book of Revelation, I'm always willing to hear the different perspectives. Sometimes I'm left scratching my head going, what? Now, here's what there's a lot more I could say. This is what we're going to do. We're going to listen, and we're just going to see where it goes. This is a 47-minute clip. There's no way we're going to be able to cover all of this evening. No way. By the time I'm done, this will probably end up being the Sunday evening service for Victory Baptist Church. So hopefully people will appreciate it. I don't know. I'm always trying to do things different. I mean, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, people. So it's not church as normal. So, here we go. So hopefully you'll find this to be fun. Now, what I hate about the audio here is clearly both individuals were not in the same studio. Clearly this is a phone interview. I hate phone interviews. Because one, the audio, I hate the audio. And two, when two people are sitting looking at each other, it just seems to be more, oomph to the interview. But when one's on the phone, I don't know. It don't like it, but I will break in with my normal, calm, peaceful demeanor. Obviously I'll be coming in, another problem with phone interviews, the phone portion is always at a lower volume, and there's no way I can sit there and try to monitor the volume back and forth. So just know when I come back in, I will come back in. I'll try to come back in at first going, I'm back. Okay. And then be loud. So just be prepared for that. You may not want to listen to this with headphones because there'll be such a variation of volume. You may want to listen to this on a Bluetooth speaker. So then it's not as irritating that way, or it doesn't, hurt your eardrum. So just a word of warning. Again, the goal here is just to listen and to analyze. I mean, there's so many different views of the book of Revelation. I'm not coming at this going, hey, I'm going to prove them all wrong. I'm coming to this going, give me your perspective. And when I don't understand the perspective, or I'm baffled by the perspective, or I'm confused by the perspective, I'm going to say so. But it will challenge us again on reading the Bible. All right. It will challenge us. And let me just throw this term out, because I think this is going to kind of become a mini theme here listening to this. I want you to write down the word, if you're taking notes, misreading the Bible. Misreading the Bible. Right? That's a real problem. Now, everyone says someone else is misreading the Bible. Everyone says that. Everyone says that. I saw something today where someone had written something that if your pastor teaches you that you cannot lose your salvation, and that God's grace is greater than your sin, and that you're saved because of the righteousness of Christ imputed to your account, that pastor doesn't know how to read his Bible. And you're like, well, okay, so all right. But of course, that person knows how to read the Bible. It's always interesting when we speak, we know how to read, but everyone else doesn't know how to read. Have you ever noticed that in Christianity? Look, you're misreading your Bible. No, you're misreading. No, you're misreading. You're misreading. You're all misreading. I'm the only one that's right. Yay. But at the same time, sometimes you have to say people are misreading the Bible. I mean, because I'll put it this way: there's only one way to read it, right? Not everyone's way can be correct. So I think there comes a time where you have to say they're misreading their Bible. That's false doctrine. You do have to say that. But at the same time, we always have to always demonstrate a little bit of humility and teachability to realize that for every person we say is misreading the Bible, there's the exact same number of people saying that we are misreading the Bible. Everyone thinks that they read it correctly. So what does it mean to misread the Bible? What are the signs that you're misreading the Bible? Like if we were to develop a checklist, how to know if you're misreading the Bible. Even if we gave that checklist to everyone, do you think that would bring everyone into some form of uniformity? I will put it this way. I think if we came up with a pretty general checklist on what to look for to know if you're misreading the Bible, I think we could all agree on this. Not that we would all come to an agreement on doctrine. I think what we could agree is that if everyone could come up with an agreed upon checklist that these are signs that you're misreading the Bible, I think it would correct a lot of things that we do find within Christianity, but here's the problem. If I come up with a list of signs of knowing you're misreading the Bible, there'll be plenty of other people who won't even agree with my list of what I believe is signs that you're misreading the Bible. I don't think we could even come to an agreement on what it is to misread the Bible. But yet, I stated this in the Bible Institute. Let me state it here. Don't let the fact that we can't even agree on what it means to misread the Bible. Don't let the fact that no one can agree. Don't let the fact that everyone fights about it. All of that is discouraging. Yes, but don't let it discourage you about the Bible. That's not the Bible's fault. All of that fighting and all of that arguing and all of that, nobody can agree on how to read it and nobody can agree on what misreading it is. All of that arguing and fighting and disagreement and 5 million different interpretations, that is discouraging and you should be discouraged by that. But don't let that discouragement discourage you about the Bible. None of that's the Bible's fault. It doesn't say anything about the Bible. It says something about us as people. It says something about us that either A, we're incapable, we could talk all things it says about us. So just keep that in mind. We're getting ready to listen to a podcast about the book of Revelation. Clearly, no matter what the man says, someone's going to disagree. And someone's going to immediately say he's misreading the Bible, but he's going to make an argument that other people are misreading the Bible. And so we'll see. But hopefully this will be fun. So let's just kick back. Let's enjoy. And let's make Let's make the most of this during this time of a global pandemic. Let's just we're going to turn our mind from all of the noise of the world, and we're going to turn our mind to the noise of the book of Revelation, which is noisy because there's usually so much arguing and yelling about it. But here we go. Let's listen. Thinking caps on, and you may have to listen carefully when the person is doing the phone interview because the phone portion at times doesn't sound very good. At the very beginning, it sounds like it's breaking up, but it seems to correct itself. So just stay with me. Let's listen. Let's see if we can get something out of this.
There's some truth in saying it's the most biblical book of the New Testament in the sense that virtually everything in the book of Revelation has every verse has some kind of allusion or reference to a prior passage in the Old Testament. Often several layers of allusion in one short text of Revelation. To try to figure out what's going on in Revelation, you really have to probe into the entire Bible, not just the New Testament. So part of the effort was to just remind readers that to read the book of Revelation with the remembrance that it's a book of the Bible and it's dealing with the same concerns that the rest of the Bible deals with. It's not suddenly projecting us out into the 21st century, out into the concerns of contemporary geopolitics. Those aren't the issues that John and his audience are concerned with. They're concerned with first century issues.
Does doctrine really matter? The Apostle Paul once wrote to a young pastor named Titus, instructing him to hold firm to the trustworthy word he was taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine. Welcome to Credo Podcast, where doctrine matters and theological ideas have consequences. Here's your host, Dr. Matthew Barrett, Executive Editor of Credo Magazine and Associate Professor of Christian Theology at Midwestern Seminary. Welcome to the Credo.
And let me jump in right there. Doctrine does matter. And theological ideas do have consequences. Those are true, absolutely true statements. A great way, kind of a great little tagline for their podcast very good, very well done, and I agree completely. Doctrine does matter. Theological issues do have consequences. And if you heard just in their little tease there, hey, the writers that John was writing to, they only had first century, issues in mind. Well, that's true, but did the book of Revelation, is the book of Revelation only dealing with first century issues? Period? Has nothing to say about the future? Well, that's if someone was to go with that mindset, which some people do, then anyone who reads it with future concerns are like, nope, you're misreading the book of Revelation. So you can already see, you can hear a little bit of a perspective, a doctrine, a theological idea, and it does matter. And there are consequences here. Whatever he says about the book of Revelation, there are consequences because his way of reading the book of Revelation could greatly influence how other people read. So there are consequences. What's the right way to read it? And, well, let's continue.
Podcast where doctrine matters. I am Matthew Barrett, your host. One of the most important books in the Bible, though also one of the most controversial books in the Bible, is the book of Revelation. In our English Bibles, it is the last book, and it's one that has been in the spotlight century after century. In part, this is because there are so many different interpretations of the book of Revelation. Sometimes I worry, though, that as Christians, we tend to get so focused on approaching this book as a type of code or a book that's supposed to reveal when the end is going to happen, that we actually misunderstand the book, why it's been written in the first place, or even miss out on so much of its rich theology because we're trying to read the book like, say, a newspaper. And not just its theology, but also its Christology. I am amazed again and again as I return to the book of Revelation, how from beginning to end, it is coded and colored by Jesus Christ. Not only what he's done in the past for our salvation, but also what he promises us and what he holds out as a future hope in the new heavens and earth. Well, there are many, many commentaries on the book of Revelation, but 2 volumes have just released, not that long ago, actually, by Peter Leithart. These 2 volumes are a massive commentary on the book of Revelation, a significant contribution, and they are written from a seasoned scholar, one who is president of the Theophilus Institute. Of course, he's written, you may know him from so many of his other books. He has a Brazos commentary coming out on 1st and 2nd Chronicles. He also has a book soon to release on the 10 Commandments, among many other books on exegesis, theology, as well as church history. And I have asked Peter to join us on the Credo podcast to help us understand Revelation better. Peter, thank you so much for joining the Credo listeners today.
Thank you, Matthew. It's wonderful to be with you.
When I first opened this commentary on Revelation, it started in a way that I never, ever could have expected. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I've never read a commentary, let alone a commentary on the book of Revelation, that started off with The Simpsons. And you begin with that episode, the Treehouse of Horror, number 8. And maybe we could just start off our conversation by describing, maybe you could describe to us, what in the world do The Simpsons have to do with the book of Revelation, and perhaps the way that a lot of Christians tend to think of this book and even approach it?
Well, I started with that part of it that wanted to set a particular tone. The book is a serious contribution to the scholarship on Revelation, but I want to write commentaries that are readable and enjoyable to read. So I thought starting with something a little bit lighter was a good way to get into the mood, and I tried to do that periodically through the commentary and throw in asides that would be amusing to at least to 1 or 2 readers, I hope.
have to jump in there because it's just funny because if you've been listening to the Theology Central podcast, you know we've been doing kind of a mini series on Christians and culture. And here's a good example. He's using culture to try to set up his discussion on the book of Revelation in his commentary. Now, like he said, it's a serious scholarly work, but he's trying to make it very readable and relatable. And to make it relatable to obviously people who are going to be buying a scholarly work on the book of Revelation, which obviously you would think would be Christians, he's going to relate it to the Simpsons. Now, there are some Christians who would be absolutely not. You don't use the Simpsons. That's an ungodly, show that promotes all kinds of wrong ideas. You can't use that. Others will say, no, that's a great way because it's relatable because so many Christians probably watch the Simpsons and love the Simpsons. So that just, again, shows you that even how to approach a commentary and how you use culture or make a reference to culture, again, gives kind of a philosophy of one's cultural mindset. Can you use that? And if you do, is that an ungodly thing? You'll have some Christians who would condemn the commentary just for its use of the Simpsons. I'm not joking. Some would just say it's worldly, it's ungodly, right there from the start. But again, that talks about culture, and that's why we've been discussing it. And I was going to do another episode today on that. We may wait till this coming week because, it's such an important topic, and you're seeing it being played out right here. So, all right, so he starts his commentary making a reference to an episode of The Simpsons. He's going to talk about that and why he did that.
The thing that you're describing, The Simpsons has an annual episode of the Treehouse of Horrors around Halloween, and this particular episode, it starts out with a scene from the cartoon that the children in The Simpsons like to watch, Itchy and Scratchy. It's like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, but it's hyper violent. And there's the two characters are fighting. One starts stabbing it, and up behind him you see a rating of the maturity level of the scene. And as he keeps stabbing, that maturity level keeps going up and up and up, and finally gets to 666, and that's the maximum. That's the maximum level of horror and violence you can have in a cartoon, I guess, in Simpsons world. And partly I was wanting to start there too because it does illustrate the pervasiveness of certain symbols and ideas from the Book of Revelation, even though the book as a whole may not be well known. If you say 666 to somebody, many people will know that that's associated in some way with evil, with the Antichrist, with Satan. Even if they've never read the entire book of Revelation.
When we talk about how, when we talk about the book of Revelation, we often jump right into it. Everyone has those passages they want to talk about, and maybe for all kinds of reasons. You mentioned at one point, though, that Christians and even non-Christians tend to misread the book. And
there's our word, misread the book. Christians misread the book. Now, here's the thing. When you make the claim, and I want to make sure you really think about this, when you make the claim, you're misreading it, then you are claiming that you know how to read it and that there is a certain way to read it. So what you would have to lay out is, here are the ways to read it. Now, are you going to say these are the ways to read it? Are you going to simply read it and say this is the way you are to understand it? Now, there's a big difference by saying, hey, you're misreading it, let me teach you how to read it, versus saying you're misreading it, here is how it's to be read. Here is how it's to be understood. It's one thing to give you principles of how to read it versus giving you my interpretation and saying my interpretation is the correct way of reading it. Those are two drastically different things. Hey, when you read the Bible, here's the rules that you follow, and this is how you read. And if you don't follow these rules, you're misreading. Now, versus, see, that's one way, versus saying, nope, you're misreading it, but let me give you my interpretation because my interpretation represents the right way of reading. So read it with my interpretation, and ding, 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 you are reading correctly. That's not the same thing. Saying you're misreading is like, we're going to talk now for the next 30 minutes about the principles of reading that you need to utilize when reading the book of Revelation. And so just keep that in mind. There's a big difference between those two. Well, make sure you hear that again. Misreading Hey, you're misreading it. Here are the ways you read the book of Revelation. Here's the way you read the Bible. Here's 5 tips to ensure you're reading it correctly. Versus you're misreading it. Now let me give you my interpretation. You go with my interpretation, and if you go with my interpretation, you're reading the Bible correctly. That's a completely different thing. And make sure you understand the difference there, right? One is telling you how to read, the other one's telling you, hey, you read it my way, and then you're reading it correctly. That's something different, right? So is it possible? This is just an idea. This could be a good test. All right. If anyone listens to this for the Sunday evening service at Victory Baptist Church, you could get your family together, right? And say, come up with 4 or 5 things that you would have to agree upon and how to read, right? Number 1, how do you read? Number 1, you read it in its historical context. Number 2, you read it in its textual context. You can't take a verse or passage out of context. You got to know what it reads, okay? Number 3, you need to know at least some background information about the book, right? Number 4, you got to make sure you're using a correct understanding of the words and looking up definitions, okay? So just basic rules. If you can get everyone in the family say you're sitting at the kitchen table listening, if you can get everyone to agree, or even if you listen to this in a small group study, if you get everyone to agree on those rules, then take a passage of Scripture, hand out the passage of Scripture, right? And then when you're done, see if everyone comes to the same interpretation. If they do not, is that because they're misreading? Is it because they're misreading, or because you can all agree on the right way to read and still come up with a different interpretation? Is the difference in interpretation a result of misreading, or is the result of a different interpretation? Does it have absolutely nothing to do with misreading, and it has to do with something else? What causes the difference in interpretation? Misreading or something else, or misinterpreting, right? In other words, I think you could get, I'm claiming this because I think you could get a lot of people who supposedly have the exact same idea, the exact same method of interpretation, and end up with wildly different interpretations. Well, then are you saying they're misreading it? Like, I don't think a difference in interpretation can only be leveled at you misread it. In other words, you didn't follow the basic rules of reading. Well, what are the basic rules of reading? Well, know the textual context, historical context, know the background of the book. Make sure you look up the meaning of words. Okay, Scripture with Scripture, do cross references. Just the basic ideas. I'm like, I believe all of that. That's the way I read. Okay, well, why did you come to that conclusion and I came to my conclusion? Like, how did we come up to such radically different conclusions? I will argue, especially with the book of Revelation. Are you ready? Listen to me. I think if you're going to talk about misreading, listen to what I'm about to say. I think one of the biggest issues with misreading is when you read the book of Revelation through the lens of your presupposition. See, I can believe, like if I'm an amillennialist, I can believe you're misreading the book of Revelation if you don't come to an amillennial conclusion. But I could be reading it through the lens of an amillennialist. You could be reading it through the lens of a premillennial dispensationalist. And guess what? We're going to come to different conclusions. Now listen to what I'm about to say. It is misreading. It is misreading when you read it through the lens of your presupposition. If your presupposition, because if you read it through the lens of your presupposition, then you're simply placing the presupposition into the text and then you read the text. Well, then guess what? If I'm an amillennialist, I'm going to place my view in the book. I'm going to read it and I'm going to find amillennialism. So I think misreading is when we read through the lens of a presupposition. So that is misreading. So like, in other words, I think here's what would happen. If you get 5 people who all agree on the basic rules of reading, and they're all dispensationalists and they're all premillennialists, they're all probably going to find in the book of Revelation premillennial dispensationalism, and it's not going to be because they followed the rules of reading. It's because they came to the rules of reading with a presupposition in mind. Presuppositions can corrupt reading. I don't know how anyone can deny that. Like, you got to throw out your presupposition and just go to the text. Like, what is the text telling me? Right? And then go. Now, we could talk a lot about that, but let's continue.
Sometimes very badly. We sometimes bring what you call false expectations to the book. And we do that in all sorts of ways. In this commentary, are you not just commenting on the text, giving us the theology of the text, but are you also helping us to just approach the book through an entirely different mindset?
Yeah, intense. And a couple of simple ways I've tried to describe how Christians misread the book. One is to forget that the book of Revelation is part of the New Testament. People read from Matthew.
Now, let's stop right here. Now let's make sure that he's going to give you some ways people misread the book. Now, is he going to give you, they read it through the lens of their presupposition? To me, that's the issue. He's saying people read the book of Revelation forgetting the rest of the New Testament, or forgetting that it's in the New Testament. Now, that's an interesting argument. I don't know if anyone does that, because what I have discovered is people in the book of Revelation, when they read the Revelation, they will cross-reference all kinds of other verses in the New Testament. They'll cross-reference Revelation with the book of Daniel. They cross-reference the book of Revelation with all kinds of verses in the New Testament, Thessalonians. You go on and on and on. So I don't know. I don't know if too many people, maybe there's some way that they approach the book of Revelation like different. We'll let him articulate what he means by that. That one caught me a little off guard, because again, how do people misread it? Here's the number one way they misread it. They learn a system of eschatology. Once they learn that system of eschatology, then they read the book of Revelation with that system in mind. Most people rarely does a person read the book of Revelation without any understanding of it. Like, they've never been taught anything about eschatology. They've never been taught about anything about eschatology. They don't know pre-trib, mid-trib. They don't know anything about that. And they just read the book of Revelation and voila, now they have a system of eschatology. Typically, you're taught the system of eschatology while people give you certain verses from the book of Revelation, and then from that point forward, you read the book of Revelation through that lens. I think most people don't just develop their eschatology by reading Revelation without some system already in mind or some system guiding them. So I think it's presuppositions that cause the problem. But he says the problem is people read it forgetting that it's part of the New Testament. That's a new one on me. Let's let him explain.
To the book of Jude, and they know that certain things are going on. They have the ministry of Jesus in the gospel, the ministry of the apostles. They have Paul with his concerns about the early church, Judaism, and the incorporation of the Gentiles into the people of God, concerns with justification by grace through faith. And then when you get to the end of Jude, those concerns kind of disappear, and you turn the page and you're in the book of Revelation, and suddenly you're in a completely different set of issues and concerns. That has to be a misreading of the book. Revelation, on any dating of the book, I take a kind of minority view on the date of the book, but on any date of the book, it's within the either within the lifetime of the apostles or shortly thereafter. The latest dates that people give to the book are in the early 2nd century. So the kinds of things that are going on in the rest of the New Testament are still going on in Revelation, and the concerns of Revelation are still the concerns of the rest of the New Testament. So that was one of the things that I was trying to think through, is how does Revelation fit with other things that we already find in the New Testament. The other kind of formula I used was to think about it's not only a book of the New Testament, it's a book of the whole Bible, and it's always an exaggeration to say something like this, but there's some truth in saying it's the most biblical book of the New Testament, in the sense that virtually everything in the book of Revelation has every verse has some kind of allusion or reference to a prior passage in the Old Testament. Often several layers of allusion in one short text of Revelation. To try to figure out what's going on in Revelation, you really have to probe into the entire Bible, not just the New Testament.
A couple of things here. I think it's interesting that he says that people kind of forget that it's a New Testament book, and the way he kind of tried to make his case is that the issues that were going on from Matthew to Jude, those issues are still going on in the book of Revelation. Okay, maybe that's 100% true, but is the purpose of the book of Revelation to address the issues that have been addressed from Matthew to Jude? Or was the purpose of the book of Revelation to tell those 7 churches about things that were to come that went beyond the issues of the first century? Or was the purpose of Revelation simply to talk about the issues of the first or second century and to do so in a symbolic apocalyptic literature, using an apocalyptic genre of style? Like, hey, the purpose of Revelation was to address the issues of the first and second century, and it did so using apocalyptic genre of literature. It used that style of writing to do so. Well, why do it that way when Matthew to Jude has been addressing the issues of the first and second century, right? Like, what? So I don't really get that. Hey, it's addressing the same issues. The same issues are going on. Okay, maybe the same issues are going on, but are you claiming the purpose of the book is to address those issues? Or is the purpose something grander, great? Now your presuppositions are going to come in. If my presupposition is, hey, that book is only dealing with issues pertaining to the first and second century, it's not dealing with some, future this, future that, as far future. In other words, it's all, pretty much it's all been already fulfilled by now. Well, that's a presupposition you bring into the text. Does the text tell you that? How do you read that? Now, if you come with the presupposition, the book is dealing with, things past, things present, things future, then you're going to find that. So I think that's interesting. Now, he also seemed to imply that a lot of people don't understand that it's a very biblical book, and that pretty much every verse, you have to go trace the ideas either in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think you see plenty. I think, in my opinion, every time I've heard sermons in the book of Revelation, they usually cross-reference things to death. They're pulling from this, they're pulling from that. I think people do understand it's a biblical book. Now, the problem is you can cross-reference things and still use it in an erroneous way if you're reading the cross-reference and you're reading the original text through the lens of your presupposition. Then you can make the cross-reference fit your presupposition. So, yeah, I think presupposition is the issue. That's my issue, but he doesn't seem to be going that direction. Let's continue.
But part of the effort was to just remind readers that to read the book of Revelation with the remembrance that it's a book of the Bible and it's dealing with the same concerns the rest of the Bible deals with. It's not suddenly projecting us out into the 21st century, out into the concerns of contemporary geopolitics. Those aren't the issues that John and his audience are concerned with. They're concerned with first century issues. They certainly have relevance for us. They're applicable to our situation, but that's not the immediate concern of Revelation. And we read it wrongly if we make that leap.
I love what you just said, because we tend to isolate the book of Revelation and interpret it all on its own. But as you just mentioned, this is a Christian book, and it fits within the Christian canon. At one point, you have just a helpful chart where you even chronicle and detail many of Revelation's uses of the Old Testament. And I must admit, even as I've read the book of Revelation in the past, I have not always paid attention to the many allusions to the Old Testament throughout. You say at one point allusions to Old Testament events, persons, patterns, and structures. These are not poetic window dressing. They are actually determinative for the theology of Revelation. As you think back on the book of Revelation and what you've written, would you say that there are maybe there's one or two Old Testament allusions that you feel are prominent, maybe even more than others, prominent throughout Revelation?
Yeah, two come to mind immediately. The first is an explicit statement right at the beginning of Revelation in Revelation 1:7.
All right, let's consider this. Go to Revelation 1:7. I'm just curious what he's going to do here, all right? Revelation 1:7. Revelation 1:7. All right, and this is what we read. The book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 7. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. That seems pretty emphatic. That seems pretty clear, right? Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. Now, we would definitely connect that with the second coming of Christ. He's coming in clouds. Every eye will see him. They which pierced him, also they which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. This is true. It is true. It's a true statement. He's going to come. It seems like a pretty clear statement. Now, there seems to be some that cross-reference that to Daniel chapter 7, I believe verse 13. We'll see if he goes there. But just, there is definitely there's some Old Testament references there I think we could find. But, all right, well, let's see where he goes. Just listen carefully to where he goes here.
John introduces himself. He gives a blessing to the 7 churches that he's writing to. And then in verse 7 of the first chapter, he quotes from Daniel 7, behold, he's coming on the clouds. Every eye will see him. Many commentators recognize that that's a kind of thematic verse. It's a summary of an important theme of the whole book. What's important, I think, is not just to see that Daniel 7 is setting the frame for the book, but to go back to Daniel 7 and figure out what Daniel 7 is actually talking about. Mm-hmm. When it talks about the Son of Man coming on clouds of glory, that's the reference. It's not just an illusion, but that's setting us up to understand what the message of Revelation is and what is the drama that's going on. So when you go back to Daniel 7, that's the vision of Daniel where he sees a series of beasts coming up out of the sea that represent different ancient empires. And then after all these beasts have come out of the sea, he sees a 5th kingdom come. This is not a bestial kingdom. This is a kingdom of a human being, a son of man. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of Adam reference, Adam as the subduer of the beasts. And the reference to the Son of Man coming on the clouds in Daniel 7 is about the ascension of the Son of Man to receive the kingdoms and the power and authority that had belonged to the bestial empires. So when when John uses that phrase, he's coming with the clouds, referring back to Daniel 7, I think he means us to have Daniel 7 in mind. And the important part of that is that it's about the ascension.
All right, stop. Stop. Okay. Now, this is good. This is good practice. This is good stuff. Okay. Now, okay, where do we even go here? Okay. So Revelation 1:7. Let's try to put this together. Now, this is a situation where he probably should just stop and stay with Revelation 1:7 because he's making a very important claim here. And I don't know if I don't want to speak for him, but I have to use the words he used because I get a little bit concerned here what he's possibly doing, and just shows you, like right here, we're in 7 verses into the book of Revelation. Here he's getting ready to reference this, and already I'm going, wait a minute, where are you going? And I think, and he's already made some clear, dogmatic statements that basically the book of Revelation is not concerned with things in the future. It's concerned with the concerns of the 1st and 2nd century. That's a major claim, all right? And that sets up a presupposition. Now, here is what he does in Revelation 1:7. Let's think this through, okay? Just stay with me here, and you can do your own work on this, but this just shows you, how crazy this can get. So Revelation 1:7. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. Now, he connects that to Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. He's saying that that's what's being referenced here. Now, I don't know if that's what's being referenced here, okay? I don't know. what the similarity between Daniel 7, verse 13 is this. Let me read it to you. Daniel 7, verse 13, in my vision, in the night, I continued to watch, and I saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So what the similarity between Daniel and Revelation is the clouds, coming on the clouds, right? Revelation states it, behold, cometh with clouds. Daniel 7:13 says, coming with the clouds. So what we have, the similarity is coming with clouds. There's the similarity. I can't say that Revelation is specifically trying to borrow from there. Now, he makes a point that Daniel is about the ascension. Well, you could see that. The one like the Son of Man comes. Let me go back to it. One like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. Here, the Son of Man is led into the presence of the Ancient of Days. Okay. Well, that is definitely the ascension. Jesus ascends in the clouds and then goes into the presence of the Ancient of Days. Okay. Daniel, you can say is an allusion to the ascension. Fine. But are you saying that that's the ascension is what Revelation is trying? Wait. Now that's where I get a little confused. Wait a minute. The Revelation, that's clearly the second coming. In fact, to me, Revelation 1:7, see if this sounds a little bit more like it. Revelation 1:7, now I'm going to read another passage and see if you see kind of a similarity here, okay? Then I will pour out on the house of David and on the residents of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and prayer, and they will look on me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns an only child, and weep bitterly for him as one grieves a firstborn son. That's Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. So if the clouds is a reference to Daniel, well, the piercing, look at Revelation 1:7. Every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Well, that's not a reference to Daniel. That's a reference to Zechariah 12. Then I will pour out on the house of David and on the residents of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and prayer, and they will look on me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him, and one mourns an only child and weeps bitterly for him as one grieves a firstborn son. So, is Revelation 1:7 a reference to Daniel, or is it a reference to Zechariah? Is it a reference to both? Well, what does the ascension have to do with Revelation? These are important issues that we have to consider. I'm going to back this up just a little, right? Maybe more than a little, but I want you to hear that whole thing in its context again. Here we go.
Daniel 7, and figure out what Daniel 7 is actually talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When it talks about the Son of Man coming on clouds of glory, that's the reference. It's not just an illusion, but that's setting us up to understand what the message of Revelation is and what is the drama that's going on. So when you go back to Daniel 7, that's the vision of Daniel where he sees a series of beasts coming up out of the sea that represent different ancient empires. And then after all these beasts have come out of the sea, he sees a fifth kingdom come. This is not a bestial kingdom. This is a kingdom of a human being, a son of man.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of Adam reference, Adam as the subduer of the beasts. And the reference to the Son of Man coming on the clouds in Daniel 7 is about the ascension of the Son of Man to receive the kingdoms and the power and authority that had belonged to the bestial empires. So when when John uses that phrase, he's coming with the clouds, referring back to Daniel 7, I think he means us to have Daniel 7 in mind. And the important part of that is that it's about the ascension. What's intriguing about that, what's odd about that, is that by the time John is writing, he's writing about things that are going to take place in the future, shortly, he says, to take place. But the ascension of Jesus is already past. That's something that's already in his past. It's not something he's looking forward to. And yet he talks about it as something that is still future. He talks about it, the theme of my...
No, wait, so you're saying John is talking about the ascension as something yet future? Like, I am baffled by, I am so confused by this. Look, what are you talking about? How is that reference the ascension? The only thing, you take it to Daniel 7 because they both came in clouds. Well, one came into the clouds, they came into the presence of God, and this one, he's returning and the whole world's going to see the one and they're all going to mourn. Like, how is that the ascension? So when Jesus ascended, everyone mourned so if this is the ascension, behold, he cometh with clouds and eyes, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindred of the earth shall wail because of him. Did everyone wail in the ascension? You can read about the ascension in Acts. Like, I don't understand. But remember, he's telling other people are misreading it. So have I misread Revelation 1:7? What I like the ascension, and that John is speaking of it as something future, that even though it's past, like, or speaking of the past event, that is a little crazy. All right, let's continue.
My book he says, in effect, is going to be the ascension of the Son of Man and the glorification of the Son of Man. But Jesus is already glorified. So in what sense is the Son of Man being glorified? And as we read the book through that lens, I think we see the point of that is that the Son of Man, even in Daniel 7, already represents more than just the individual Jesus. It's Jesus with his people. Daniel 7 includes a couple of references to the people of the saints of the Most High, who, along with the Son of Man, receive the kingdom. And that's what Revelation is about. It's not about the ascension of Jesus directly or the glorification of Jesus in his own resurrection and ascension. It's about the glorification of Christ in the ascension and the glorification of his saints. So that
he's literally almost using Revelation 1:7 as a key verse to set up how you understand or interpret the whole book. But if his key to interpreting the whole book is that Revelation 1:7 is about the ascension and not the second coming, then but so the book of Revelation is about the ascension of Jesus, not about the coming of about the ascension of Jesus in glory with his saints, not the second coming. Wow. And you want to know, like this is, but again, he thinks other people are misreading it. This is how it can go in Christianity when it comes to this book. Let's see where else he goes.
That was one verse that was really crucial for, and again, it's the key is to look back at what the allusion means in the original context, and use that original context as the frame, the lens through which you look at the book. The other passage I would point to is more implicit, and therefore I'm less certain that this was in John's mind or in Jesus' mind as he's revealing these things. But I think it does. I think it works, and it does capture a really important, large movement of the book. I think Genesis 1 and 2. I'm sorry, Genesis 2 and 3, and particularly Genesis 2, Adam's creation and the formation of Eve. That fits a large-scale frame for the entire book of Revelation. Jesus appears at the beginning of the book already glorified. He's the last Adam, and he's glorified in his first appearance to John at the end of chapter 1. Jesus is the bridegroom. We know that from John's gospel. But in John's gospel, he never is seen with his bride. And what the book of Revelation is about is the formation of the bride of the Son of Man. The Son of Man is already glorified. It's, John sees him, and it's like he's ready for the wedding. He's all dressed up for the wedding. All he needs is the arrival of the bride. And the book of Revelation is, in a sense, about the formation of the glorious bride that appears at the end of the book. That formation comes as the church participates in the sufferings of the Son of Man. The book is largely about martyrdom, but it's about martyrdom as part of the formation of the bride that's going to be glorified along with her husband.
All right, now he's making a very major interpretive idea, okay? Jesus appears glorified. He is the bridegroom. And so the book of Revelation is about the formation of the bride and this is formed as we endure the sufferings. So in other words, all the sufferings in the book of Revelation the church is participating in. We're going through them. We go through them and we come out, then the glorified bride, and it's formed through tribulation. So we go through, we endure much tribulation, and that's how the body is formed. So that's what it's about. Right? Martyrdom, which would have been a major issue in the 1st and 2nd century. So literally, this is a book just saying, hey, all this symbolism, all of this language, all of this crazy symbolism, all it's saying is, hey, the body is being formed through much tribulation. That's all. So all of that language, we don't have to really be looking for trumpets and plagues, and we don't have to be looking for all of these things that it's talking about. They're not literal. This is all figuratively speaking. It's all speaking about martyrdom. You're going to suffer, but through the suffering, the body, the bride will be formed, and then Christ will ascend with the bride, and then everything will be wonderful. But I bet you the new heavens and the new earth are very literal, okay? All that suffering that's described, that's not literal. That's just tribulation. But when we get to the new heaven and the new earth, I bet you that's very literal, okay? I always find that funny. Hey, all of this is just kind of symbolic for the formation of the bride. But when we get to the new heaven and new earth, let me tell you, literal, okay? Literal. Nothing else is literal, but that's literal. That's always interesting the way that plays out. So, but again, everyone else misreads it. So this is some interesting, that Daniel thing confuses me to no end. Revelation 1:7 is the ascension. That's the key to interpreting the rest of the book. Whoa, man, this is, but he's laying down presuppositional framework for you to interpret the book. That's what he's doing. He's laying down the presuppositional framework to interpret the book. All right, here we go.
So Genesis 2 and 3, again, this is more implicit, and so I can't be as dogmatic about this, but I think that sets a nice scope for the entire book. Looking at the two ends of Revelation, you have the last Adam appear at the beginning, you have the new Eve, the church, appear at the end, and the book is a movement from Jesus to Jesus and his bride.
You know, when you talk about Jesus and his bride, this maybe this surprises some listeners because they're not typically used to hearing about the book of Revelation in terms of the person and the work of Christ, both past and future. You, though, have very helpfully put Christ in the context of the whole canon in terms of a second or a last Adam. I immediately think of Revelation 1, like you've mentioned, this vision of the Son of Man. We could also go to Revelation 5, such a powerful passage where Jesus is described in terms of this lamb. And Revelation 5, it opens where this question, a daunting question, is asked, who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? And there's this waiting that occurs, and even a weeping that occurs. But then comes this great news, weep no more. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, he's conquered. And then it moves from there to the Lamb. And we're given this picture in which here is this lamb, and yet it is a lamb that is alive, yet it is pictured as one who is slain. And from there, the rest of the chapter goes on to describe this lamb as not only the one that the elders are falling down before, but also the one who's then worthy to open the scroll and its seals. We could also go to the end of the book of Revelation, Revelation 22, where it talks about Jesus and the hope that the bride of Christ has for his return, and on and on and on. Maybe you could speak for a second here. How does Christology in particular, how does it for John, how does it come into focus, and how is it, whether it's Revelation 5 or a whole number of passages, how does it serve to frame the entire book from beginning to end?
Yeah, well, I think you've done a good job of showing that it's overarching the entire book. Jesus appears as the Son of Man at the beginning. He comes toward the end, in chapter 19, he appears as a rider on a white horse going out conquering. He's there in the final city, the New Jerusalem, which is the bridal city. That's the bride that's been formed through the book, and it's the place where the God and the Lamb are enthroned. Jesus and his work is pervasive in the book, and that's another, I think, example of what we were speaking about earlier. That if missing that point, I think is behind that failure to see how pervasive Jesus is in the book is a failure to read Revelation as a part of the New Testament. We know the New Testament is about Jesus. We know the Gospels are about Jesus. We know that's Paul's ministry. But then we kind of forget that when we get to Revelation, and people get distracted by all kinds of other things. But as in the rest of the Bible, Jesus is absolutely central. As the Lamb, he's the one who's enthroned in chapter 12. He receives the kingdom. He's exalted in order to rule the nations with a rod of iron. He's the conquering king that comes later on, as I said. I think the particular Christological insight that I think Revelation reinforces. It's something that you find in the rest of the New Testament, but I think it's reinforced in Revelation in striking ways. And that is the way that we as the saints of God participate in Christ's suffering and in his glory. It's, in the sense, the book of Revelation, even where the book of Revelation is talking about the church and the martyrs and the saints and their suffering, it's still talking about Jesus, because the church's suffering is meaningful because it is suffering in union with Christ. Mm-hmm. The church's resurrection and deliverance from suffering is meaningful because it's a participation in the glory of Christ. So even when it's talking about the church, it's still talking about Jesus. Christ is the head of his church. The church is his body. And as the body, we all participate in his sufferings and glory. And that's one of the things that I think Revelation depicts in dramatic ways that fill out things that are in the rest of the New Testament.
You know, when we talk about Revelation, you know, we're discussing Christology, but naturally we could move from Christology to just history.
I just want you to really wrap your mind around that. Hey, in dramatic ways, yeah, you talk about dramatic, in a dramatic way, not in anything literal, not in anything tangible, but in dramatic ways. What the book is saying is that, hey, we participate with Christ in suffering. We suffer with him, in him, we suffer for him, and so we're going to suffer. But in the suffering, ultimately, you know, the body will be formed, the bride will be formed, and everything will be glorious. But again, so all those sufferings, they're not literal sufferings in the way they're being described, right? I mean, you can go through the book of Revelation and read about all of these things that happen. If you read about the trumpets, we can go all the way back. See, we have the first seals that is opened. There went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat there, and to take peace from the earth, and that he should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And he opened the third seal, a third beast, and he go through all these things that occur. You've got some crazy things that are happening. Crazy things that are happening in here. You got earthquakes. You just got all these crazy things that are happening. But all of that is really saying, all of that is simply saying, hey, we're going to suffer. We're going to suffer with him. That's all it's saying. It just seems bizarre that it has to be described in such an apocalyptic way. An apocalyptic language is being employed to simply say, hey, we're going to suffer with Jesus. So those sufferings are not, the sufferings are real, the sufferings are literal, but the way they're being described is not literal, right? So are you saying they are being described literally? That we're gonna suffer through the sword, we're gonna suffer through famine, we're gonna suffer through maybe that's the case. Maybe that's a good way to read it. But then it's just really like then what's I bet the heaven and earth is very literal. There will be literally no more pain and no more suffering and no more death. Literally, that's literal. Okay, there'll be a literal new heaven and a literal new earth. But this becomes the weird part and how to handle this. But let's try to finish this up.
And this raises a whole complication of issues, a whole spectrum of issues here as to, well, how do we interpret this book? What type of hermeneutic should we bring to this book or not bring? Sometimes in the past, Christians have felt that they must choose between, say, reading Revelation in a very literal fashion, or maybe we could say literalistic fashion. That might be more accurate. Others have said, no, there's nothing like that there. It's completely figurative. Either one of those options may pose some challenges. You actually make the case, though, at one point that we need to adopt what you call a literal-figurative approach. Say when it comes to imagery, for example, or typology, or you even mention you've hinted at this already, just the church and faithful discipleship, some of the very real, even historical implications for the church of John's day and the church in the centuries that will follow. Maybe you could touch on this just a tad. How should Christians be mindful? Let's put it that way. How should they be mindful to pay attention to both literal and figurative in the book of Revelation, and sometimes at the very same time?
Right. I think that's exactly right. And my that combination of terms that you mentioned is an effort to try to overcome a stark difference between literal and figurative. Because you can have, people, I think it's easy to get confused about what literal means. I think I used the example in the book. I have in the past. I don't know if it's James Cagney or not. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's somebody else in some James Cagney movie who says to somebody else, "You dirty rat." Now, is that a literal statement or is that a figurative statement? Well, in one sense, it's obviously figurative because he's not talking to a rodent. He's talking to a human being. In another sense, it's literal because it's referring to an actual person. So there's a literal human referent. And that human referent, the person who's being called the rat, actually has rat-like qualities. Not because he walks on 4 feet or because he has whiskers or because he's got a scaly tail, but because he dwells in the sewers and he's kind of a lowlife. And there's various associations that are connected with rats that are intended to be attributed to that person. So there's this overlap of, it's a figure in one sense, but it has, we don't want to stop just by saying it's a figure. We want to figure out what is the kind of literal import of that figure. And I think a good example in Revelation would be the various beasts that appear in the middle of the book. You have this sequence in chapters 12 and 13 where the dragon appears in heaven ready to devour the child, the Christ child, as soon as the child's born. The Lord delivers the child from the dragon, and the dragon pursues the child, pursues the mother, fails, but then kind of calls up reinforcements, and the beasts are the reinforcements that the dragon calls up. And so what you ultimately get is a kind of unholy trinity of the dragon, who is Satan, the sea beast, who I think is the Roman Empire, and the land beast, who I believe is the apostate members of the Jewish community, particularly Jewish leaders who are opposing the church. So you get this kind of unholy trinity. But when John calls the Roman Empire a beast, for example, let's say that is what he's referring to. That's not literally the Roman Empire is not literally an animal. It's a political structure. So in that sense, it's a figurative use of language. And yet, John wants us to think about what do beasts do? Why would the Roman Empire? How is the Roman Empire like a sea monster? So the beast has a particular referent, the Roman Empire, and that Roman Empire has certain qualities of bestiality to it. And particularly in this case, I think it's the Roman Empire is being described as a predatory beast. As the description of the beast continues in the beginning of chapter 13, it describes the beast attacking and assaulting the saints and overcoming them. And so in that sense, the Roman Empire is a kind of bestial empire. So I think so that's one kind of knot of issues for interpreting the book within its original context. And then the question then becomes also, how can you use that for Christians 2,000 years after the book was written? How is it still relevant? If John is talking about a particular empire of the first century and calling it a beast, does that mean that the book is just about a historical set of events and not about the various challenges that contemporary Christians face? And I think the answer to that question is no, that the book is still relevant, but it's relevant in a kind of analogous way. So the beast of Revelation 13, the sea beast, I think refers to the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire has there are analogous empires, analogous powers in the history that follows the events of Revelation. You can think of totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. I've just finished reading a report from an Anglican bishop about the persecution of Christians around the world today, and it's several hundred million Christians are under threat of severe persecution today, often from state powers. Now, I think it's entirely appropriate to say those are bestial powers. Just as the Roman Empire was in the first century, we can apply that same figurative language to predatory powers, predatory states in our own day, and we can then begin to think about how Revelation might give us encouragement in the face of those persecutions. If a Christian in a country that's where the state is a persecuting state reads Revelation and sees that, well, Jesus overcomes the beasts. The beasts are going to be defeated. Jesus, after all, is the Son of Man, and the Son of Man is the one who tamed the beasts. I can put my confidence in Jesus. I'm going to hold firm to Jesus. I'm going to be loyal to Jesus, and he's going to overcome this beast as he overcame the beast that was talked about in Revelation. So I think that's the kind of sequence of reasoning that I would suggest. That I think all of the imagery of Revelation has real reference in history. They're talking about real events and real things that happened within, for the most part, within a short time after Revelation was written. But then those events and those institutions, those characters in Revelation continue to reappear, or characters like them, institutions like them, continue to reappear throughout history.
So just so that you understand, the way he's telling you to approach the book of Revelation is this. It uses figurative language, right? Like he used from that classic movie, You Dirty Rat, right? That idea, they're not speaking of a rat, a literal rat, but speaking of a person in a figurative way, using a figure of speech. So the book of Revelation employs figures of speech to describe earthly powers that were present, that came to pass shortly after the book of Revelation was written, and that it's all occurred and that all happened and it's done. But it serves as an analogy of like type situations. Hey, we have powers that come to pass now, authority and powers that come to pass that are very much like the ones in the first and second and third century. And so we can draw an analogy from it, and we can take hope that Jesus overcame them and he will overcome these, I guess. Now, So in other words, we're not looking for any of these events for future. These are all past events, and we just see what we can learn from them. In other words, you would almost approach the book of Revelation, according to the way he's saying, like we do the Old Testament. Those things happen as examples for us. So the book of Revelation is simply an example for us. Hey, we're going to suffer. They suffered. We're going to suffer. When we suffer, we trust in Jesus because ultimately Jesus will overcome. Now, I don't know if that means he's literally going to overcome them in a literal way, like literally he's going to return and literally crush them. Or are you just saying he's going to come back Like that's always the problem. Like, hey, this is all figurative. This isn't literal. But when it talks about Jesus coming back, is he literally going to come back and literally destroy his enemies? Is that literal or is that figurative? That he's not literally coming back, that he figuratively comes back through and he overcomes his enemies through the preaching of his word. That's how an amillennialist may approach it. Is that what you're saying? So then he's not literally going to overcome them. Like what? Like, I understand the figure of speech and I understand the argument of trying to make this all history. I understand that argument, but then just saying, well, it's an analogy to us. Just there's so much of the text that the way you read it is, you see all that language, people? Well, that's talking about the 1st and 2nd century bad government who did bad things. Now, let me go look up some history books, give you some interesting history, and then here's 3 lessons we can learn from it. In other words, you're not trying to figure out, wait, that could be this, that could be that. Now, that's a radically different approach, and I understand that approach has its place in church history, that many have held to that belief, but it just seems like a weird way to write it. But just to keep that in mind, that's kind of what they're claiming. And we'll see if at what part he believes is still possibly future for us, if any of it. He could go to a whole full-blown preterist idea that this all has been done. The whole book has been fulfilled. Let's see where he goes.
And so Revelation continues to give us a framework and a set of lenses to read our own moment in history.
Speaking of a sequence of reasoning, Revelation 20 tends to be one of those passages that Christians of all types and stripes have returned to again and again. Maybe one of the most controversial passages, widely interpreted passages. You think, for example, of a spectrum here. Everyone from on one end of the spectrum, maybe a classic or a progressive dispensationalist, to a historic premillennialist, to on the other side, someone who's more in line with an amillennialist understanding of eschatology, and so on. There's probably more nuances there I'm leaving out. In the history of the church, this Revelation 20 is somewhat of a round table, a meeting ground on which many of these views converge and engage one another. As in your study, again, it's so specific and thorough. When you started to prepare for this passage, how did you approach Revelation 20, and how is it that you make sense of this mention of the 1,000 years, and what are Christians to how are they to walk away from Revelation 20, and with what end goal should they have in mind?
Yeah, there's several things that I think set the context for trying to answer that question. One thing that I have emphasized when I've taught on Revelation in the past, and I believe I put into the book in some form or other, was the danger of overestimating the importance of Revelation 20 within the book. I don't want to underestimate it, but there can be a tendency to make the millennial question the question of Revelation, and in some cases the question of New Testament eschatology.
Right.
I think New Testament eschatology is much broader than just the question of the millennium. So one of the points I'd want to make is just to put it in perspective, not to minimize its importance or to ignore it by any means, but also to say it's one chapter out of 22 in the book, and it's one chapter out of dozens and dozens in the New Testament, and it's the one place.
Now, I just want to throw this in there. He's kind of now downplaying a little bit of its importance. Now, I understand what he's trying to do. I agree. It's one chapter. But remember what his argument, kind of the way of addressing the book of Revelation. Hey, all these horrible things that's happening, these are all the things we're going to go through. All right? We're going to go through them, like we're going to suffer in some way. And there's going to be these beastly, governmental powers that comes around, that tries to, and that persecutes and kills and imprisons and does all these horrible things. But Jesus is going to overcome. Well, if Revelation chapter 20 is not literal, well, then where's the hope? Because Revelation 20 is Jesus is going to come back and he's going to subdue all of those earthly powers. He's going to defeat. He's going to sit on the throne. He's going to make his enemies his footstool. He's going to rule. He's going to reign. There is the hope. He's going to bring it all under his control. But if it's not literal, so we're going to suffer literally. We're literally going to suffer. Right? I guess some will. Some will. Maybe. Oh, for all the Christians who do suffer, Revelation 20 is for you. For those who live in a country where you have freedom and you're not really suffering, I guess Revelation is really not for you. So then Revelation 20, I don't know. I have a hard, I would have a hard, some systems of eschatology in my mind makes it almost impossible to really preach the book in any meaningful way, because you're just kind of like, hey, for those who suffer, this is for you. If you're not suffering, it's not for you. And I don't know. But let's see what he does with Revelation 20.
Where we have this, so that'd be part of my contextualization. The other thing that I tried to do in the book, in my commentary, I became convinced through reading and studying Revelation over the course of a number of years that the book is largely written in narrative sequence, and that there are a few points where it seems it reverses, goes back in time as it were, and then moves forward again. But I think in general, it's moving in sequence particularly from the opening scenes in heaven in chapter 4 through to the end of the book, the first part of Revelation 22. You have some concluding kind of epilogue in Revelation 22, but from chapter 4 through the beginning of chapter 22, in general, I think we have a sequence there. We're not going through the same things in a kind of cyclical pattern as some commentators have argued. There are cycles of sorts, but I think those cycles are part of a larger linear kind of sequence, if there are complications on the linear sequence. So when reading Revelation 20 in that context, I see it as it's coming after the fall of the harlot city that happens in Revelation 18. There's a celebration of that harlot city in Revelation 19. In my commentary, I identify the harlot city with Jerusalem, not with Rome, as is often done. So I believe that Revelation is largely talking about the events surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And I believe the book was written, Jesus revealed the visions to John a few years before that. So the city has fallen.
Wow. So he's going with, this is talking about 70 AD. 70 AD. That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. So I'm just kind of going very preterist view. Very preterist view is where this is going. Hey, this has all been done. This is talking about everything was done in 70 AD. And that he revealed this to John prior to 70 AD. Can we get a dating of the book prior to 70 AD? I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can. I don't know where I put give me 1 second. Well, you can look it up because we've already been well over an hour. You can look it up. Look up every source you can and see how many sources you can find that puts the dating of the book of Revelation prior to 70 AD. If not, then if this is reference to 70 AD, then guess what? This is just describing the events of 70 AD in the most apocalyptic language possible. So it's all history. It's all history.
You see Jesus coming out as the conquering hero, leading a procession and leading the captives that he's triumphed over, and then the millennium begins. So I think if I'm right that the book should be read in sequence, and if I'm right that Revelation 18 is about the fall of Jerusalem, then what would follow is that Revelation 20 is about the beginning of a period of history that follows that set of events. I think the millennium begins in the first century. It begins with the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus with the conflicts of the early church, and that culminate with the conclusion of that first generation with the destruction of Jerusalem. And I believe since that time, we're in this millennial period that's already lasted 2,000 years. I think the 1,000 years is a symbolic number that's referring to the entire period between Jesus' initial work in his first coming and the coming of the final judgment. So Revelation 20, the characteristics, I think, of the millennial period are that Satan is bound, he's restrained. It doesn't mean that Satan is eliminated. Satan is not eliminated in Revelation until after the final judgment. He's thrown into the lake of fire after the judgment. But during the period of the millennium, Satan is restrained from deceiving the nations. The other thing that's characteristic of this period is that the saints are reigning with Christ. Both of those seem like odd things to say about the period of history that we're in. It doesn't look.
So here we go. We're in the millennium now, just so that everyone knows, according to this theory. Welcome. You're in the millennium. You're in the millennium. Now, of course, the way Revelation 20 seems to be described is all those enemies have been destroyed and everything has been subdued and a wonderful time. But no, we're in the millennium now. We're right now in the middle of a global pandemic. Hey, that's the millennium, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! Aren't you glad that we're in the millennium? Aren't you? Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. You didn't find that funny. Are you excited that we're in the millennium? Woo! The millennium, everyone. This is it. We're in it. We're in the millennium. Satan is bound. We're ruling and reigning with Christ. We're in the millennium, everyone. We're in the millennium. Thousands of people are dying from a pandemic. Everything's locked down. The economy is collapsing. We're in the millennium, everyone. Woohoo! This is good times, man. Good times. Yeah, what's the difference between the millennium? Well, the millennium's been going on, for 2,000 years. So just think of all the things that's happened during the millennium. World War II, Nazi Holocaust, World War I, Civil War, okay, Vietnam. Look, think of all the horrible tragedies and all the things that have happened during the millennium. Well, what was the time before the millennium? So, like, what changed? What changed? Satan. So Satan was doing things prior to the millennium that he's not doing during the millennium. Well, Peter says he's roaming about like a roaring lion seeking whom may devour. This is where this is where it's a hard time to take this kind of stuff serious. Like at this point, just throw out the whole book. I mean, the whole book, like what's the point? It used this great language he's seated on the throne and, ruling and reigning. And no, man. I mean, it's just like, it's just now. It's just today. Just now. Great encouragement. Hey, that beast that's out there destroying everyone. Hey, he's going to be subdued. And he's subdued now. Wait, he's not subdued now. Wait, is he subdued? So for all the people persecuting, the book of Revelation is supposed to bring great encouragement, but the great encouragement is that you're in the millennium now. Yeah. That was a mistake. That's not sarcasm. That's not sarcasm. That was a mistake. I wasn't trying to hit play on that. Okay. That's not sarcasm, but yeah, it kind of feels like, whatever. All right, here we go.
Like Satan is restrained. It looks like Satan is quite active. And it also doesn't look like the saints are enthroned and reigning. I think there are other reasons apart from Revelation to say that those things are already true, but not yet completely true. Satan is defeated, but not yet eliminated. The saints are reigning, but all things have not yet been subdued to Jesus Christ and to his people. So we're in this already not yet kind of situation. I think that's what the millennium is describing. But I think Revelation is describing a situation where the saints in union with Christ are reigning over the creation. But Paul says that more literally in Ephesians 2 when he talks about us being raised from our death and sin and transgressions so that we can be exalted with Christ in heavenly places. In Christ, we're already restored to our Adamic position of reigning over creation. And I think that's what the millennium is describing.
You mentioned that as saints, we will be reigning over the creation, and I don't want to take that for granted. You mentioned at one point that, rather than approaching the book of Revelation in terms of, trying to decipher, when the end is going to happen and all that sort of thing, you recast the book, so to speak, and say, well, in light of this cosmic collapse, as you call it, this cosmic collapse that's unfolding, that Revelation is picturing, we should think of it more in terms of the unveiling of the end of the old creation and the ushering in of the new creation. Now, you've just mentioned that that is a great hope and promise for those who are in union with Christ. Sometimes as Christians, for a variety of reasons, we tend to think of the afterlife merely in very popular caricatures, maybe as soulless or bodiless entities that are existing in some mysterious states in this place called heaven, which we don't, is a mysterious thing in and of itself. But when we come to the book of Revelation, we actually see an entirely different picture. Yes, there is an intermediate state, so that when we die, we go to be with the Lord. But ultimately, the Christian's hope is in something much more, a new heavens and earth, in which creation itself is made anew, and we are not only serving our King, but also reigning as his vice regents over the created order. And of course, by the end of the book of Revelation, we think of Revelation 21. We see a full picture of this and the hope that is given to us in this new creation. Maybe you could speak for a second here to, we've talked about Revelation 20. Sometimes that gets all the attention. You mentioned, though, that we need to also give our attention to other parts of the book just as much, if not more. How does Revelation 21 act as a bookend to conclude the book by pointing us to this future hope in a new creation?
Yeah, I think that the point you're making is a really important one. Revelation 21 begins with a statement that John sees a new heaven and a new earth, the first heaven and the first earth that passed away. And that's consistent with the rest of the New Testament's teaching about the resurrection of the body. We won't have fleshly bodies. We won't have mortal bodies. But we'll still be embodied creatures. We'll be living in a new earth, which means that the physical stuff of creation will still, in some form, be present to us. Now,
I want you to see what just happens. Now he gets very literal. A new earth. A new earth. A new body. Now, like all this other stuff is symbolic, and we're in the millennial now, and the beast but now, boom, new earth. There's gonna be some still material, material ideas of the earth there. We're gonna be in a new earth, a new body. Now, these things are actually going to occur the way they are described. That's what blows my mind. It's like, well, everything, no, past, history. We're in the millennium now. Boom, new heaven, new earth, going to happen as it's described. Whoa. How do you do that?
The world will be living in eternally. I think that's really crucial because a lot of Christians, as you say, do mistake their future hope, or they mistakenly think about it as a merely disembodied existence in heaven. The Bible speaks of it much more as a recreation, a renewal of the creation. Romans 8 would be another place where the Spirit is groaning, waiting for the revelation of the sons of God and the redemption of the cosmos as part of that vision. So I think that's crucial. I in my commentary, I took a somewhat speculative, I guess, view of what's happening in Revelation 21. This was one place where my editors, Scott Swain and Mike Allen, told me that they were not persuaded by my interpretation. There are probably other places, but this is the only place they told me that they were not persuaded. And the uniqueness or the oddity of my view has to do with the structure of the book. The first part of Revelation 21, from verses 1 through 8, actually belongs to the earlier part of the book. There's 4 great visions in Revelation. One of them begins at the beginning of chapter 17, and it doesn't end until 21:8. And then a new vision begins when John is carried away in spirit up to the mountain. That's in 21:10. And then the rest of chapter 21 and the beginning of 22 are part of that 4th vision. So it's odd in any case. Revelation 21 is odd because John sees the new creation. He sees the holy city coming down from heaven in verse 2 of chapter 21. And then he's taken up to a mountain in verse 10, and he seems to again see Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. So there seems to be two descents of the bridal city, which is in itself odd. But I was arguing that there's actually a structural distinction there, and what John is seeing in the latter part of Revelation 21 is actually not a different city, but he's seeing a different phase of the descent of the city. I think the earlier part of Revelation 21 is a vision of the completed new creation, what we will be living in forever after the last judgment. We have the last judgment scene at the end of chapter 20, and that moves into this new heaven and new earth in chapter 21. But then when he goes up on the mountain at the end of chapter 20, or the latter part of chapter 21, and he's looking at a city, that city, I think, is a city that that's a vision of what the church aims and aspires to be, not just what we aspire to be when the new creation comes after the judgment. But this is kind of a pattern that we're supposed to conform to. I think of it by analogy with the pattern that Moses saw at the tabernacle. He was taken out on Mount Sinai, and he was shown a vision of the tabernacle. And then he came down and told the Israelites, and they were to build the tabernacle according to the pattern on the mountain. David saw a pattern for the temple, and he relayed that to Solomon. And Solomon built the temple according to the pattern that the Lord had revealed to David. And now John is seeing at the end of the Bible, John sees this vision of a city, and I think he's delivering it to us. And like Moses and David, he is essentially instructing us now: build this city, build a people, build a city of God that resembles this pattern that I'm showing you. So things like the purity of the city. The city it sheds its light to the kings of the earth, so that the kings can bring their treasure into the city. Those are things that we hope for, but they're also things that we are called to embody already in this age. This is the kind of people that the church is supposed to be. So that last vision, I think, is more about this current age rather than about our future hope. We do hope for the final descent of the bridal city. We hope for the new heavens and the new earth. But we're already in this city, and we've been given the pattern, and we're supposed to build and work in faith that the Lord will realize this pattern by the power of the Spirit.
We've been talking to Peter Leithart.
All right, I'll have to stop there. That pretty much concludes it. A lot more I could say, but the frustrating thing is he does what so many people do with the book of Revelation. Hey, that part's not literal. That part's not literal. History, 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 history. Nothing future, nothing future, nothing future. All done, all done, all done, all done. Boom! Now, judgment, literal, real judgment, literal people are going to be placed in hell. Literal, wait, new heaven, new earth, literal. And then all of a sudden it becomes very literal, very definitive, while everything else is kind of like wishy-washy. Well, I mean, this is just about us suffering, and we're going to suffer. And then Revelation 20, the millennial, that's just, that's us now. We're ruling and reigning with Christ now. It's not, Christ coming and ultimately destroying all of his victories and making, all of his enemies and making them his footstool and, subduing everything. No. All of that is now. So, when you read the book of Revelation, it's like, how do you preach that? Hey, we're going to suffer. All this suffering is it's not literal figure. It's historic suffering. So then I can try to find each thing and go, well, at this time, this many people died during an earthquake and this many people died during a plague. So I think that's what this is referencing. Try to connect it to something historical. Say, but it still applies to you today's suffering. And then ultimately, Christ will come. Ultimately. There'll be a new heaven and a new earth. But when he comes, it's not to rule and reign. He's not going because we're ruling and reigning now, and you're in the millennial now. It is, I know it's a classic way to handle the book, but man, there you have it. There you have it. There's a lot more we could say, but what do I want you to hear from all of that? I want you to hear this. He started by saying people misread the book. Then he gives you the way to read the book. And if you don't read it his way, you're misreading the book. And I'm saying some of that, I don't even understand what he's talking about, especially Revelation 1:7 saying that's the ascension. I definitely don't get what he's talking about. So I'm thinking he's misreading the book. That's the problem. And again, what do I think is the primary cause for misreading is because we all have our presuppositions when it comes to the text. That's what I think. So I'll stop right there. You can email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Everyone have a great week. God bless. Be safe. Look after one another. And please contact me about any subject. I've always love to hear from the listeners. All right. newsif@yahoo.com. God bless.